Welcome to the last of our series of instructions for use videos in preparation for our reading and discussion of Inferno 18, the first of the three cantos dedicated to the eighth circle of simple fraud as opposed to treachery, also known as the Malebolge or evil pouches, a coinage of Dante's, and to Inferno 27, the eighth of the Malebolge, that is the eighth pouch dedicated to the false counselors, the second of two cantos dedicated to them, which focuses on the Italian political mastermind, a kind of proto-Machiavelli, Guido da Montefeltro, whose political dealings with Dante's nemesis, Pope Boniface VIII, ended him in hell. However, Pope Boniface is already featured implicitly, as Chiara will explain, in a structurally significant simile in Inferno 18, verses 28 through 33, which is the subject of her video this week, which includes a visit to the Bridge of the Angels that crosses the Tiber in front of the Vatican. Please remember that Pope Boniface and his Jubilee of 1300 have been a subtext since the very first verse of the poem. In the middle of our life's way signified the year 1300, the same year as Boniface's Jubilee. But let's return to the map and the instruction for use, that the first thing to consider is where we are in hell, since the geography of hell is an explicit subject of the poem. The first 21 lines of the canto are a kind of map, which gives a bird's eye view of the architecture of the Malebolge. Dante and his guide Virgil have been transferred from the seventh circle of violence to the eighth of fraud on the shoulders of the monster Geryon, introduced at the end of Inferno 16, who ferries Dante and Virgil on a long, terrifying descent described in Inferno 17. You can see Geryon descending on the 10 pouches of Malebolge on the left. There are several things worthy of note, starting with the depth or distance between the seventh and the eighth circle, where Geryon sets down Dante and his guide. Let's look at the first, or the opening passage of Inferno 18, describing Malebolge from the bird's eye perspective, as if viewed from the helicopter of Geryon descending. There is a place in hell called Malebolge, made all of stone, the color of crude iron, as is the wall that makes its way around it. Right in the middle of this evil field is an abyss, a broad and yawning pit, whose structure I shall tell in its due place. The belt, then, that extends between the pit and that hard, steep wall's base is circular. Its bottom has been split into 10 valleys, just as where moat on moat surrounds a castle in order to keep guard upon the walls. The ground they occupy will form a pattern. So did the valleys here form a design. And as such, fortresses have bridges running right from their thresholds toward the outer bank. So here, across the banks and ditches, ridges ran from the base of that rock wall until the pit that cuts them short and joins them all. This was the place in which we found ourselves when Geryon had put us down. The poet held to the left, and I walked at his back. The last line recalls the first line, rather, the last line recalls the last line of the first canto of the Inferno. Remember, then he set out and I came behind him. It's almost as if the start of the Malebolge cantos represent a new beginning of the poem. The distance between violence and fraud signifies how much worse fraud is than violence in Dante's ethical vision, since fraud is the perverse use of human intellect and intelligence, the highest attribute of human, for evil and sinful purposes. The intellectual and distinctively human quality of fraud as a category of sin also explains the prevalence of urban architectural motifs as opposed to the natural environments of the rings of the seventh circle of violence throughout the Malebolge, starting with the description of Malebolge at the opening of Inferno 18, which compares it to a series of moats surrounding a castle, which with the bridges running across the banks of the ditches, a kind of inverted medieval castle going down to the abyss. Finally, one can't help but noticing, as we consider the map of hell, that Dante dedicates more cantos, 13 cantos of a total 34, from Inferno 18 to 31, to just the 8th circle, more than any other circle of hell. Dante evidently considered fraud a big problem for his society and accordingly a major focus of his poem. Architectural motifs and the architecture or design of the poem are emphasized and reach an unprecedented level of complexity in this section of the poem from yet another perspective. Consider this map of Malebolge that represents the ratio of the evil pouches to the cantos, between, that is, the represented space of hell and the space of representation, that is, the order of the poem's cantos. Dante, the author, has fashioned a kind of penitentiary for the fraudulent, whose infernal complexity and symmetries of design reflect the author's attempt to imitate the complexity of the art of God, the Creator. Note the inversion that frames the whole structure. Canto 18 contains two different pouches, while two cantos, 29 and 30, treat one pouch. The same kind of inversion occurs between evil pouches 3 to 5 and 7 to 9. In other words, in the first segment, we have two evil pouches treated in single cantos, 19 and 20, followed by a single pouch, which is treated by two cantos, 21 and 22. After a single evil pouch, 6, the hypocrites, treated by a single canto, the ratio is reversed in the second segment, with one pouch treated in two cantos, 24 and 25, followed by one pouch treated in two cantos, followed by a single pouch treated in a single canto, 28. There are many insights that Dante's design encodes. For example, the reversals I've just described create a convergence around the sixth evil pouch of the hypocrites that gives that pouch a kind of centrality within the order of fraud.